Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Donna Cangelosi. Donna Cangelosi is a children's author and clinical psychologist. She has a background in child development and creative arts therapies, and is passionate about helping children deal with social emotional issues. Donna writes stories about people who made the world a better place and the wonders of childhood, animals, and nature. She also maintains a private practice working with both children and adults. Donna hopes her stories will connect children to themselves and others. Welcome, Donna. Please tell us a little more about yourself and your new book.
Thank you for having me. My book is called Mr. Rogers' Gift of Music. And as you mentioned, I'm a child psychologist. So I wrote this with two hats on. One is to introduce children to a wonderful man, but also to kind of get into a little bit of the emotional content of what he did for children and how his legacy can still help children deal with their own feelings.
And why did you choose Mr. Rogers? Was he like, were you a fan of his stuff? Did you watch his stuff yourself, your kids? Why him?
Yeah, it kind of came to me. It's an interesting process because a lot of times I intentionally say I'm going to write a book about this person. I love writing picture book biographies, but Fred Rogers kind of came to me back in 2016. I've been working as a child psychologist for a few decades now, but back then I was seeing just a cluster of bullying, just a lot of kids being bullied. And I only work in one town, but it was kind of striking me that this was becoming a little bit more of a pandemic before the pandemic. So 4 or 5 kids I was working with in different ages were dealing with bullying issues. And at the time I was starting to dabble into writing picture book biographies. And I thought, like, I want to write about somebody who helped children. So serendipitously, I start kind of just playing around with like who helped kids, and I come across Fred Rogers and started dabbling into the research and found out that he was bullied as a child. And not only was he bullied, but even before then, he had a lot of loneliness. He was very sick as a young boy, and obviously went on to use his messages, his music, his stories, his puppets to help kids. So it took a life of its own. It just, then I started dabbling a little further, digging deeper, and found out that he studied with a lot of psychologists that I had studied in graduate school. And one of them was kind of my hero, who I did my dissertation about. So all the pieces started coming together, and just I have to write about him. And so there we go.
When you write about a figure like Fred Rogers, do you need to like get the okay from the family, or you could just publish a book on a personality without ever, just based on other biographies or other literature that's out there?
Yeah, it's a great question because when I first started writing them, I asked a lot of people that have been in the publishing world, and they said as long as you're saying stay very accurate to the facts. So it involves a lot of research and being very meticulous about getting it right, not skewing it in any direction, and certainly not making any negative statements about a person. So for Fred Rogers, that was one of the hardest parts, is like how to stay true to him, because as you get to know a person like him, he was just genuinely Fred Rogers. I mean, he was just literally just such a lovely human being. So to capture that in an accurate way was a very big challenge in a way.
I imagine. I read the book, and I thought it was wonderful. It was I watched the movie a few years ago with Tom Hanks, so you kind of got an idea of Fred Rogers, but this was from the eyes of a child, like children looking at so made it a little like easier to read, but also to gauge that all of the things that he did and how well he did it for kids, and his background story as a child, um, where music was like such an important factor in his childhood, from his grandfather to his mother. Um, how important was music to Mr. Rogers and to his audience? How important do you think it was?
He described it as essential. Because he was bullied, it started when he was, he had asthma, so he was stuck inside, and It's funny, when I was writing the book, I had this image of this little boy looking out the window and seeing everyone play, and the illustrator got it so perfectly in the illustrations. So he was stuck inside and would watch his neighbors play, and he heard his grandfather play the violin, and it was sunshine. It brought life to his world. And I don't know all of the time frame details. It's not very specific, but his mother would also play the piano for him. And then he started to play, and they don't describe him as a prodigy, but he sounds like one. He would just listen to tunes on the radio and he would get it, and just became an essential part of his life. Then he was bullied because of his weight, and there was horrible nicknames about his weight, and he would always return to music. And then in one interview that I listened to, he described music as his way of expressing himself and his gift to children. So it was just, it was just a story that I felt needed to be written.
Absolutely. It was, yeah, absolutely. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, so I might be partial. Um, did you watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood while you were working on the book? Did you?
Oh yes, like probably every episode.
Okay.
I kind of binged it. Also, the interviews are phenomenally helpful too. He did, as I mentioned, this one interview for the Archive of Television and Radio, and I think it was 6 episodes, 2 hours each. And it's just lovely to watch him and his response when she asked him about his life. Um, so those were very helpful, and his speeches are just so touching. So between the shows and that, I kind of found that that was the most helpful part of my research, to kind of get to who he was.
And so I'll turn some questions to writing. What inspired you to start writing, and how long have you been writing?
I probably started writing poetry when I was in grade school. I remember being in a poetry group with a few of my friends. We just, after school, would write poems. So I always loved it. I loved lyrics of songs. And then kind of school took me away. And during graduate school, I didn't really write much. If something big happened, I would write a poem here and there. But then after graduate school, I was at a conference, and the speaker, a very renowned play therapist, that's my field, is play and creative arts therapies, read a book. It's called, I'm sure everybody who knows anything about children's books, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And he talked about how this book, he would read it to children during their first sessions, and how it would be kind of a way to show them, I get you, I get how difficult life could be, and how challenging these little things that we as adults take for granted. So you didn't find the right shoes, that ruined your day? No, but for a child. So I fell in love with the whole idea of picture books being a way to really capture children's emotional experiences. And when I say fell in love, I fell in love. And I think most of my friends who are picture book writers talk about that too. It's like it became a passion. So I started writing back then, and I raised my daughters. I kind of let it go, and I gradually got back into it and really went full force, joining, the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and attending classes and conferences. So long.
How oh, how many books have you? How many children's books have you written?
Have I written?
Yes,
um, I'm probably up to about 20.
20.
Um, some of them need a lot of work though. Like you're always kind of manicuring, getting them in the right format and in a way that children will relate to, in a way that they could be illustrated and really convey the message in a child-friendly way.
And how many have been published?
One.
Just the one. Okay. And do you use the ones that you've created? Do you use them, like, have you had them like bound or anything, and to use for with the children that you see? Or those are
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Early on, I actually did just do that just for my own sake. I didn't try to sell them or anything. I just used them for my own sake. Maybe I would share them with a few colleagues. And that was back in the 80s. That was literally a long time ago, the 90s. But when I got into the whole idea of traditionally published, for me, it just felt different, like to have a professional illustrator um, put my book to life. So for me, that's the path that I've been following most of. But in the my very first two books were very emotionally driven, the social emotional themes. And I
Mhm.
would talk to kids about them and share them in my office, but that's as far as it went.
And are the books that you've written, are they all nonfiction like Fred Rogers, the biography, or are they more fiction?
They're a combination, probably 30% are biographies. I love the picture book biography, but that's been a bit more recent that I've kind of started writing that genre.
Mhm.
Um, so I always try to balance both fiction and nonfiction. But I would say that most of them are fiction at this point.
And how hard is it to write for a child? Because I mean, it's not an easy. It's probably much harder than writing for adults.
Yeah,
That's at least what I've always heard.
it's very hard. Yeah. I thought when I first started, I can just write a story and look how lovely this is. Then you find out that you really want to really streamline the amount of words, but not only the amount of words, but how you say things and then the flow. And there's a lot to it.
So, what's the most difficult part of writing for you?
For me, it's the overthinking. I thought about this hard and hard when I saw your questions. For me, it's I overthink things and I try to find the perfect way to say them. And I find that if I just start to write and I just stop judging myself, I'll just write a story and then I could always go back. But I find it so hard. So I'll get stuck on one page for hours just to find the right words. And then I end up having to not use them anyway. So I need to not overthink it.
Having talked to both children and adult authors, um, that is one of the things. Like the adults are like, I just spoke to another author last week, and it's like I want to try and write 5,000 words a day, and I'm thinking, okay, that's for adults because you've got to hit this amount of pages and everything. But the children's authors tell me a different story, you know, um, where you're trying to like capture that the essence of what you want to convey in that page in the perfect words, the fewest words, the right level of the vocabulary, depending on if it's going to be for the kids to read or the parents to read. Like so, it's so much. It's so different, and it's hard to to like convey that. Like that's what I've tried to with this is get the people to understand that there's a difference. There's a difference in writing both. It's not the same. Do you have a writing routine?
I really try. I try to write at least 3 times a week, and it really varies. I've been, promoting my new book. It just came out 2 months ago, so I haven't had as much time to write. But I try to find blocks of time. I can't really dig into really writing unless I have at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So I try to do that twice a week, 2 to 3 times a week if possible. But I try to do something for my writing every day. I try to put some time into either, critiquing a friend's writing or doing something that revising an old story, which I do a lot of. I kind of try to get into my old stories and give them new breath, a breath of fresh air. And so every day, pretty much except weekends. I'm trying not to work on weekends as much.
How long did it take you to write the Fred Rogers book?
So there was really 2 chapters to the book. As I mentioned, I started kind of researching it in 2016, and I came up with a full manuscript, a good story called Fred's Beautiful Neighborhood. Um, and it was accepted like a year or two, about a year later. It didn't take long to be published, to get accepted. And then I think there was just a lot of things happening with Fred Rogers. That's around the time Tom Hanks movie came out. That all kind of the time frame all intersected. So the publisher asked me, they had already purchased it, to find a new angle to tell the story. So, um, I started to dig in deeper. Like it's not just about his neighborhood anymore. I wanted to dig in deeper. Like, should I write about his sweaters? Should I write about some of the themes, his puppets? And that's when I got into the whole music theme. I started reading more and listening to the interviews and started realizing it's really his music. So I rewrote the story, and that process took probably 8 or 9 months, and my editor helped me a lot. And then finally, it was proved, and it took a year or so for that. Excuse me, for the new illustrator to write to do the story.
You mentioned promoting the book. Um, so I'm guessing you're going out. Have you had any memorable reader encounters? Anything
Yeah,
you want to
and
share?
I love that question. I've only done a few readings so far. It's kind of new, but I decided that I would start each of my readings by introducing the kids to Daniel Tiger, and just to kind of make it relevant to them. And I say, "Do you know who this is?" And then I proceed to talk about his father, Daniel Striped Tiger, who was Fred's puppet. And then I show a picture of Fred. But so there was one little boy who just couldn't stop talking about Daniel Tiger and how much he loved him. So I try to involve them in the conversation after reading the book, um, and he just kept talking about Daniel Tiger and his many experiences. But it was lovely because Daniel Tiger is sort of a follow up of the show and of Fred Rogers' program, and it teaches the same lessons. So I was able to connect, but he was just too adorable.
That's great. That's a great story. Um, you've mentioned that finding the right illustrator. How did you find your illustrator? Amanda Kalatsis?
Yeah,
Is
classes, yeah.
Kalatsis?
Um,
How did you go about finding your illustrator for the book?
yeah, well, I didn't find her. The publisher does all of that. So when they selected Amanda, I could not be happier. And I've been very, very fortunate because a lot of times you don't even know the illustrator or they live in another country. And it turns out that Amanda is actually represented by the same agent, same literary agent as me, Charlotte Wenger, who's just lovely. And so every now and then, I'd say, "Oh, Amanda, I'm so happy." Or she'd say, "Hey, do you have any pictures of Fred growing up?" And, but I didn't really I wasn't involved in that process at all. It was all a beautiful surprise.
Do you, from Amanda's question too, is there like a Fred Rogers archives? Is there an archives that he has? Like, did he ever donate papers or anything?
I think it's called the Neighborhood Archive, and you could find everything Fred Rogers in there. I think if I'm remembering, that's the Neighborhood Archive, it's called. And yeah, it was an honor because when my book was published, it's in there.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's everything Fred Rogers, like has little sections on his songs. It has a section on his puppets.
But is it like a physical location or online?
It's online. Yeah.
I'm wondering if he had papers or whatever, if he donated it to a specific place, like a physical building, So that's me because that's my background is archives. So I always think like, oh, I wonder if his stuff. When you said about his kid, pictures of him when he was young or pictures of him, that would be probably where anything of that would be stored. Um,
My research was also there's the Fred Rogers Center, which I think they recently changed their name, and the director of archives actually helped me with a few of the questions to get those details just right. So there's just different. I think there's the Fred Rogers Center, then there's PBS. They
Fred Rogers Center is probably the one who got his archives. that
yeah,
that sounds more. But that's great that I assume that there would be plenty of stuff on Fred Rogers. He made quite an impact on us as my generation for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
How did you find your publisher, Page Street Kids?
Well, that was kind of a nice surprise that back in, I think, 2017, 2018, there was I follow all the book writers and promoters on Twitter. It's a very big thing for picture book writers. And I saw an interview with Page Street, and that there was an editor who now is my agent. And at the time she was an editor, and she was looking for debut writers and she loved picture book biographies. So I asked my agent at the time, my previous agent, if he wouldn't mind sending it to her. And I guess it was 8 weeks later, we got the good news.
Okay, so you had an agent. You went the agent route. So you found
Absolutely.
the agent, and then the agent went and shopped your manuscript around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay, that's good to know. um, uh, and so I think we've covered a little bit of it, the publishing journey. Um, is there anything that um, was not part of what you described earlier, how you went about, well, I guess how did you find your agent? I mean, that's part of the publishing journey. How did you find your agent?
My current agent was actually my editor, my original editor for the book. She had accepted the book, and then she had moved on. And at the time, I was in between agents, and again, things lined up really well because I loved working with her. So once she started, taking new clients, it really just was a perfect fit. And again, a lot goes on Twitter because that's how, a lot of the communication is. As soon as I saw her announcement that she was now an agent taking new clients, I ran to submitting my work to her.
And your original one, the one that basically shopped the manuscript.
I met him at a writers conference through the Society for Children's Book Writers right here in New Jersey.
Okay. Yep, I am familiar. What advice would you give a new children's writer that's just starting out?
I think for just starting out, it's just to read a lot of picture books. Like that's just such an essential part. And it's something that, I still do, everybody who writes picture books, but just to start out, because I think it's one thing knowing you have a story that you want to tell, but it's another thing knowing kind of the format or the different styles in which you could tell a story, and just getting familiar with the, excuse me, the pacing and the way the words and illustrations have to dance together, and always having an image of leaving space for the illustrator. So I think that would be my number one thing. And then just to write. And it's always recommended to join Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's so helpful. And then they have local conferences, they have virtual conferences and workshops. There's so many resources. Joining a critique group is, such a helpful thing as well. So for me, those are the things I wish I had done earlier, because I was writing way before I joined SCBWI. I didn't know what I was doing. So I was writing stories, but they weren't going to go anywhere because the way I was writing them.
Okay. And when you mentioned that you rewrite or you work on editing some of your earlier manuscripts, will you be writing another children's book? And will it be fiction, nonfiction, or are you going to take any of your the ones that you've already written and try to get them published?
So right now I have 2 books on submission. One is a biography and another is a fiction story. And just last week I started writing a new fiction. And I also have another, it's not a historical fiction, it's not a biography, it's sort of about 2 people meeting, which would be more of a nonfiction. So they're always kind of floating around, but I like to balance both. And then I also always have the old stories that I'm thinking, why didn't they sell, and trying to, kind of revamp them. So balancing.
Would it still be in like the JPs, the picture books, or would it be a little bit older? What age range are you targeting with your books?
I usually like the picture books. Yeah. I mean, I would love to dabble in something else, but I think because of my career being, I guess it's such a serious career as a psychologist, and I see such hurt, and there's something about the picture books that just keeps that youthful, playful part of me. So so far I'm just doing picture books. So pretty much from 4 to 10, depending on the content of them.
Okay. All right. I've gone through my questions. Is there anything else you want to share with us? Something that's upcoming or anything?
All I know is I'm going to be reading at the library next week. I'll be in the children's section doing a story time and craft with Bernadette.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's wonderful. Again, thank you so much for joining us today and for telling us a little bit about your new book.
So much.
Good luck on all your future endeavors.
Thank you.